Hi, everybody. It's nice to be joining you today. I see that some people have joined already and others are coming in, so I hope you can hear me okay and see me okay. I thought what I would do just at the beginning here as people are starting to arrive would just do a quick introduction of myself and give you an idea of what I'm going to be talking about today. There's the chat function. I'm sure you're all aware of that already, so please feel free to put your questions in there, and I'll get to those at the end or maybe at some point through the middle if it's something that people are more interested in. So we're going to be talking about regulations and starting your career. So two quite important aspects of hopefully what you're studying, and maybe you have lots of questions about, what to do after you finished your program here, what the laws say, what you're able to do. And so hopefully this presentation will give you some general idea about the legalities in Canada, other parts of the world, career opportunities, future education potential, and things like that. So I'm always available to answer questions. So maybe at the end as well, I can give you my email address and we can sort of go from there. So about me, I'm a medical herbalist. I'm the Dean of the School of Herbal Medicine at Pacific Rim College. I'm also one of the directors. I joined the college back in 2006 when it was first starting. I wrote the diploma program and the Community Herbalist certificate program that we offer there. For the most part, I used to teach a lot of the program until we got bigger and had more students and decided to have more instructors. I'm also the president of the Canadian Herbalist Association of British Columbia, or the CHA of BC. So I was a board member for a number of years with them. And the last year and a half, I've been their president. And I'm also a board member of Herbalists Without Borders, which is a group. They're based out of the US, but they have chapters all around the world, and their mission and mandate is to provide herbal support in places of need after disasters or any kind of humanitarian issue, kind of like Doctors Without Borders, but for herbalists. And you're joining me here today in my office upstairs in my house in Central Saanich on our farm called Tiny Tree Herb Farm, where I live here with my partner and our two kids, Tilia and Cedar. And obviously, you probably are familiar with both of those as plants, as trees. And so, when we got this farm, we were trying to figure out what we were going to name it. We looked at our little kids, and they're both little trees. And so we ended up with Tiny Tree Herb Farm. So that's where the name came from. Everyone thinks it's confusing because we live on the West Coast and all the trees are gigantic here. And so the idea of a tiny tree seems a little ridiculous, but it was our 1.5-year-old and 4-year-old child at the time that we got the name from. So that's basically me. I've been in practice since about 2001. So I've been doing herbal medicine now professionally for 19 years and studied before that. And the place that I went to school was actually in the UK at the College of Phytotherapy, which is the same school that David Caldwell and Peter Conway that you would have seen in other parts of your program studied. And in fact, Peter was my instructor, and he was one of my favorite instructors and my clinical supervisor. So I have a long relationship with Peter, and I think you would agree that he's probably one of the most amazing, inspirational herbal practitioners that you've come across. So I'm lucky to call him a friend and a colleague and have him here. So that's basically me. I feel like I've done a fair amount of work and traveling, and I'm always passionate about herbal medicine and the future growth of and the continuing involvement of plant medicine. So let's move on to starting about regulations. So when we're talking about regulations, it's basically the process by which a medical profession is accredited by a government licensing body. So we need to differentiate between a voluntary membership association. So I mentioned I'm the president of the BC Herbalist Association. So that's voluntary. There's no requirement that you join. You can be a herbalist in British Columbia and never join or never attend because it's not a regulated profession. A regulated profession has a governing body or a college. So you probably are aware of like the College of Physicians and Surgeons or the CTCMA, which is the College of Traditional Chinese Medicine. And so those are associations that regulate the practice of a healthcare modality. So in British Columbia, where we're currently located, there are 26 regulated professions, including chiropractic, registered massage therapists, naturopathic doctors, midwifery, and so on. And so herbal medicine currently is not regulated in British Columbia, and it's actually not regulated anywhere in Canada or anywhere in the world at this point in time. And so that allows us some freedoms and flexibilities that I'll talk about later when we talk about like the benefits and drawbacks, but it's currently an unregulated profession. The interesting thing about Canada is that medicine is regulated federally, so Health Canada. So this is like all of your supplements or, you know, herbal medicines or, you know, even pharmaceuticals. Those are all regulated by Health Canada. But health professions, so herbalists and naturopaths and chiropractors, et cetera, are regulated provincially. So each province has their own sort of requirements and standards that they set out for each individual health modality. And they don't necessarily line up between provinces. And so as a herbalist, we kind of straddle both of these organizations because we look to the provincial government to potentially at some point become regulated and be part of the healthcare profession. And that would happen with the BC government. But anytime that there's an issue with access to our medicine or changes to natural health products in Canada, then that's an Ottawa-based Health Canada decision that we need to be sort of aware of as well. There are some changes that are going on with the Natural Health Products Directorate in Canada through Ottawa. It's now changed to the NNHPD, so it's the Natural and Non-Prescription Healthcare Products. And basically what was happening over the last couple of years, you probably saw it on the news a lot, was that they were trying to amalgamate how all of the healthcare products like off the shelf were going to be regulated to try to bring certain things into alignment. Their fear was that certain natural products were making claims that weren't necessarily substantiated, and there was sort of a fear that the general public was being misinformed or not really having the full picture. And so they're making a number of changes now, which could theoretically impact the ability for people to access certain kinds of medicine. You'll also notice on here that for the most part, the regulated professions have a fairly lengthy training time period. And so we look at chiropractors, massage therapists, naturopaths, midwives. You know, these are all multi-year programs, 3, 4, 5-year programs that involve a lot of clinical training. And so, you know, to become a sort of a clinical practitioner with a regulated profession in most provinces in Canada, and if they were to exist in other parts of the world, it would be a far longer program with a lot more rigorous clinical training that would be required. So continuing on about regulations. So, you know, why would a why would a profession be regulated in the first place? And essentially what the government decides is there a safety issue for the public? So it really comes down to safety concerns and protecting the welfare of the general population. So if you think of things like chiropractic, you know, someone's doing manipulations to your neck or your spine, or someone is putting needles in you in the case of acupuncture, you could all see that if that was done improperly or done by someone who wasn't skilled, that there could be a very serious risk to a patient that was getting that treatment. And so the government has decided that, you know, in order to be able to do one of those kinds of professions, you need to attain a certain level of training and qualification, and therefore go through some sort of licensing exam to be entered into this regulatory college and then sort of be put forward to the public as someone who is safe and effective and has been qualified and verified essentially as someone who is able to do that. So herbal medicine, like I mentioned, is currently not regulated. And the thought process is at this point that it's not necessarily dangerous enough. You know, a lot of thoughts that people have right now are that, you know, herbal medicine is safe, and it definitely is a safe form of medicine. And one of the herbal associations actually in the UK used to have their slogan that said herbal medicine is safe medicine. And I would agree for the most part that a lot of the plants that we use are generally safe, and we have a lot of culinary plants that we use. And, you know, historically, as you've been learning about some of the plants probably in your program as well, you've heard about the ways that they would have been included in different kinds of like meal preparations. And so, you know, they don't pose a large threat to anyone. You know, the dosage range of them is quite large. But there are still some herbs that have very small dosage ranges that need to be adhered to. And we also have issues potentially with herbs interacting with certain kinds of medications. And so, you know, you could make an argument that used improperly, herbal medicine could theoretically be dangerous, and some plants could be more problematic for others than some. And the other potential issue, I think, that sometimes comes up with sort of more like self-diagnosis and self-prescribing that happens a lot with the general public about thinking that they can just sort of read a book and, you know, choose some plants, is that if they bypass seeking out professional advice from a healthcare provider, they may miss a diagnosis. And this is one of Health Canada's biggest fears, is the lost opportunity of someone traveling down a path of direction of their own self-treatment, potentially missing out on the opportunity of actually some form of intervention that might have been better suited to them. So while it isn't currently regulated, you can kind of see that you could make the argument as well that there is the possibility that it maybe should be at some point in time. It's a difficult topic to have amongst herbalists. I think in general, all of us like to be a little bit more wild and free and do things our own way. I think that's what sort of gets us here. We like the sort of history of herbal medicine and you know, the flexibility that it allows us, and the idea of conforming to some set of rules or being bound by some kind of guidelines sometimes rubs people the wrong way. And so that's one of the drawbacks. The other is potentially all being in agreement about what is a herbalist and how do you become one. So like I said, you know, in the case of naturopaths and massage therapists and you know, even doctors, they have a very set pathway that they go through to become trained. You know, the courses are all set, the material is set, the medicines that they learn are all set. Whereas in herbal medicine, there's a lot more variation. You know, there's the tradition, there's the folklore, there's the scientific exploration. You can work more spiritually, energetically, more physiomedically. And so it's well, and then what type of plants do you use? Are you know, working with local plants? Do you have like an indigenous background where you've been mentored and brought up in a system of healing that's thousands of years old? Is this you know, a new way of looking at plants that you may not have done before? And so it's kind of hard to confine what someone would have to learn to become a qualified herbalist. It sort of requires someone to carve out a pathway that is at some point going to cut people out. Either someone who is traditionally trained, they're out, or someone who uses more Ayurvedic herbs, they're out, or someone who you know, works more energetically or spiritually, maybe they're out. And so there's always this challenge of how to bring as many people together in this sort of collective group. And so that's always been one of the potential drawbacks of regulation, is how to bring people together. The other is potentially cost, because there is you know, the requirement of a regulatory college being set up. And currently in British Columbia, there's only 50 professional herbalists that have registered with the Herbal Association. Like I said, it's not mandatory, so there's far more herbal professionals out there than are part of that membership. But if you just take that number, 50, I mean, the cost of running a regulatory college is in the hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And if that's broken up over 50 people, you know, you're looking at potentially $5,000, $10,000 a year as your membership dues, which for a lot of people is just not possible. And potentially one of the drawbacks. So the cost is big. The other thing is that the government then gets involved. So not only do we have to have this internal conversation with herbalists about, you know, what can we do and how do we work, but it involves government officials who may come in and say, you know what, we want to regulate herbal medicine, but you can't treat cancer, or you can't work with tinctures, or you can only do topical preparations. And so there's this sort of general anxiety amongst herbalists that say, you know, what if they take something away from us that we're used to working on or working with, or access to certain kinds of plants, and we're not ready to sort of take that risk. So that's one of the issues as well. But benefits, so access to funding. You know, one of the things right now, if any of you have third-party health insurance, you know that you get a certain amount to cover, you know, massage therapy and chiropractic care. And so if we were, as herbalists, were a regulated profession, theoretically, insurance companies would be able to have us be able to bill them directly. The insurance of British Columbia, the MSP, they also provide certain amounts of money towards certain regulated professions, so that might be possible. It also potentially would bring more public awareness to the profession of herbal medicine. If it was regulated, it would sort of stand out more and it could be promoted more. on certain government websites. Like if you call the nurses hotline here in BC, they would obviously be able to recommend, herbal practitioners and herbal practice as a viable form of medicine that would be useful for people. And the other thing is that it would provide the ability to integrate more with other practitioners, which I think is really important. And I might just sort of stop the slide presentation there for a second. And so this is one of the things that was really important for me. Short story, that when I first started my clinical practice here in British Columbia back in 2007, when I moved here, I saw a patient at a group care home. And so they were, a 30-something-year-old individual, but had a lot of brain injuries and theoretically was sort of functioning at the level of like a 2 or 3-year-old, still under the care of their parents, but living in this care facility. So I was working with them through their parents to give, herbal advice and recommendations, and we were, making a lot of progress. One of the other clients at this group care home was in their 40s, same issue, brain injury, unable to look after themselves, but was having an issue with bowel motility. So was regularly constipated, couldn't have a bowel movement. And because they were under the care of the nurses at the facility, they basically had to start with oral laxatives. If that didn't work, it became suppositories. And this individual, couldn't understand, obviously, what was happening in the first place. And it was really a traumatic experience. The nurses every 3 or 4 days hated to have to do it. This individual hated having it done. And so they asked me, as a herbalist, is there anything that you can do? Is there like a tea or a capsule or anything that you can do to help with bowel motility? And I assured them that, of course, this is something that we've done for thousands of years, that this is easily achievable with herbal medicine. So I put a formula together, gave it to the group care home. The nurses regularly were giving this individual this herbal tea that I'd formulated. Amazingly, again, bowel motility was functional, no more laxatives, no more suppositories, regular bowel health. This continued on for a couple of months until they had to go and do their check-in with their family doctor. The family doctor looked at the records, because everything has to be recorded, how many times they urinated, how many times they had a bowel movement. And they said, this is great. What's changed? What's happened? And they said, well, actually, we're working with this herbalist. And they said, stop. You can't do that. Herbal medicine is unregulated in British Columbia. This individual is under the care of the BC government, essentially, and we can't work alongside unregulated professionals. So you have to stop. The nurses argued that this was the only thing that was helping this individual, and it was working so well, and that they would have to resort back to laxatives and suppositories. And the doctor said, my hands are tied. This is the only thing we can do. Under my care, I can't recommend it. So, when that news came back to me, I felt quite devastated that here was someone who was benefiting from plant medicine, and we couldn't continue because of the fact that it was unregulated. And so that was when I started joining the Herbal Associations and getting sort of more proactive in the idea of regulations and, increasing the public awareness and the availability of herbal medicine to more and more people. So I thought that was, really important. And so, regulation has that benefit potentially. And so I wanted to make sure that, that's something that needs to be discussed. What language can we use? So we're not doctors, and I think that's the only thing that we need to sort of really keep in our minds, that we can't be giving out this idea to anybody that we are a doctor or that we're making those kinds of decisions. I think the language is secondary. I still say patient, I say treat, I say prescribe, I say diagnose, but I'm not doing it with sort of like the definitive kind of strength that a doctor would be able to do. And so when I'm working with somebody about herbal medicine, generally I will make sure that I'm being clear with them about what I'm able to work with and how I'm able to talk with them. But I regularly say prescribe and treat and diagnose, and that's totally fine. So as a herbalist, what are we, and what are we allowed to do? So a herbalist in general is someone who uses plant-based medicines as their primary form of intervention for someone's health, and they're looking at the body holistically. So, we're not just asking them, what are their symptoms right now? You have 5 minutes, tell me one thing that's going on. We're talking about for an hour and a half, and we want to know, what's brought you in, how your past medical history has been, what's your diet like, what do you do for fun, what are your activity levels like, how's your breathing, how's your sleep, what's your stress level like, to try to get a really great understanding overall of how your health is and how you're dealing with your life. And then our interventions are, dietary modifications, lifestyle changes, but predominantly the use of plant-based medicines in their various forms, like you're learning about in herbal pharmacy. So capsules, teas, tinctures, baths, aromatherapy, things like that. So that's kind of what a herbalist is and how they work. What we're allowed to do, so this sort of comes back to the fact that we're not regulated. So the upside is, in Canada, we operate under what's called common law, which is why you hear like common law marriages and things like that. So common law says that if there's no law against it, you can do it. So there's no law against herbal medicine, so you're allowed to be a herbalist. Everyone can be a herbalist, and you're allowed to do all of these things within that realm. And so with Health Canada, the things that we're allowed to do is we can import raw herbs. So you can import, dried herbs, tinctures, essential oils, infused oils, all those kinds of things. You can stock them in a dispensary. So you can have a business where you have a dispensary, or in your house, you can do that. And through a consultation, you can customize a formula or a herbal medicine for somebody. So it doesn't say that we're not allowed to do it for a certain group of people or for certain health conditions, or that we can't use certain kinds of products. You can do any of those things. You can see any individual, as long as they're giving you informed consent, and you can make a customized formula for them whenever and however you want, as long as there's a consultation. So that consultation is that you have to have a conversation with this person, you have to have a direct understanding of what's going on, and you have to use your skill to make your best estimation about the way to sort of help them or treat them. So those are the three things that are really important to know that we're allowed to do. And then so the last thing, I know some of you asked, like, can I prescribe? Can I make medicine for somebody? So the short answer is yes, absolutely. The only thing I would say is just being aware of your own potential limitations. So, this program that you're taking right now doesn't have a clinical component to it. It doesn't sort of cover like biomedical sciences. And so going back to what I was saying before about the regulated professions being 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, it's because there's a lot more information that has to sort of come forward about caring for an individual and their health concerns. So yes, I think for yourself, for friends, for family, for people that you're close to, absolutely you can make medicines for them. Ask them the right kinds of questions, get an idea of what they're dealing with, and then go from there. And then reach out to other people if you need advice. If you're looking to set up your own like clinical practice at some point, then you would need further education, which we'll talk about in a second. So just quickly, I want to talk about herbal associations. There are lots of different herbal associations. They're usually representing like a specific geographical area or an area of expertise. And so in BC, it's the Canadian Herbalist Association of British Columbia, but other provinces throughout Canada have their own associations. You can look them up, but Ontario Herbalist Association, there's one in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia. In America, you've probably heard of the American Herbalist Guild. And so they sort of like oversee herbal medicine in America. England, there's a few. The oldest in the world is the National Institute of Medical Herbalists, 1864, I believe it was. And then there's others in New Zealand, Australia. So depending on where you're living and where you find yourself potentially setting up practice or wanting to work, check to see if there's a herbal association there, because they're really useful to become members of. So, why would you join? Some of them provide mentorship. So, they'll pair you up with somebody who is a professional practitioner, and they will, help guide you through decision-making, setting up your clinic, setting up your practice. If you come across a patient or client that you're having a difficult time sort of figuring out what to do or how to work with them, then they're available for that. There could be discounts on insurance. So if you are ultimately going to become a clinical practitioner and do like clinical practice, you're going to need certain kinds of insurance, like errors and omissions or liability insurance. And most herbal associations will offer a discounted rate because it's a group policy. And so this will potentially protect you if you make a mistake or sort of give the wrong thing and someone ends up coming back to you because you've done some sort of harm to them, then that would be the insurance coverage. Sometimes they offer webinars or educational opportunities that they'll be discounted on, or potentially like discounts on products from other companies that are also members of that same association. And then what do they do? So they're advocates for the profession. And so that's why they're sort of geographically different, because each area of the world or even each part of the country may have their own unique individual needs. Just like the health authorities, in British Columbia, we have the Coastal Health Authority, Vancouver Island Health Authority, Fraser Health. they just recognize that different geographical regions have specific needs, and the people have different needs as well. And so herbal associations exist in those same kinds of niches. They work with the government. So I was mentioning, the changes that were happening in Ottawa with the way that natural health products were being regulated. And so one of the things that we do here is that each of the provincial associations in Canada send 2 representatives to our national association, the Canadian Coalition of Herbalist Associations, and they meet in Ottawa usually once a year, if not twice a year, and they meet with the politicians and Health Canada to try to be like a sounding board. If they're making decisions that might impact the public's access to natural health products, we're there as a stakeholder to provide our insight and guidance about how that might impact people's health or their ability to access certain kinds of products. And so, as an advocate for the government, that's one of the main roles of herbal associations. And also to provide public awareness. So we like to be able to work collectively. So, being able to do like social media campaigns or attending events and conferences and seminars to make people aware of the fact that there is such a thing called herbal medicine and there are herbal practitioners, and what do they do, and how do you access them, and how much do they cost, and things like that. So herbal associations are a great way to also enhance the awareness of the profession itself. Cost, it varies, depends on the level of like the membership that you're going to be getting. So a lot of the associations will have a student membership. I believe they're about $5 a year to start as a student member. And then they range up to like $100 to $150 a year if you are a professional member. And so, the cost can vary on an annual basis. And so too are the entry requirements. They vary depending on what level of practitioner you are. So student members most of the time, or general interest. So maybe you sort of grow plants, or you just are, interested in accessing herbal medicine. You want to support the industry overall. It's just usually paperwork. It's just, putting in your name, paying your membership dues, and you're in. If you want to be a professional practitioner, then it is a lot more lengthy and vigorous, as it should be. And so you're probably going to have to show them copies of your certificates or diplomas or degrees. You need to show them copies of your clinical training, probably copies of your resume or CV. Usually they ask for like some sort of narrative where you're writing like a short essay on who you are and how you work and why you chose the profession of herbal medicine. And then there's usually a peer review committee as well, where you actually have to meet with your peers. They ask you questions about your practice, what your knowledge base is, how you work, what would you do if this certain circumstance occurred, just to make sure that you're safe, that you're ethical, that you have a good moral compass, that you are knowledgeable. Again, because this association is going to put you forward to the general public and say, we've endorsed this person. We feel that this person has the level of knowledge and expertise to help you in, let's face it, some very important times of need. And we want to make sure that we try as much as possible not to get it wrong, and that we have the right people available. Because being a herbal practitioner myself, it's quite overwhelming, or it can be quite overwhelming to sit with someone in their time of need. I know I got into herbal medicine because of some of my own health challenges, and I'm sure that's a similar story for some of you. And so what it feels like to be scared, unsure, uncertain, worried about a diagnosis or a health condition, and you really rely on somebody knowing more than you do and guiding you. What do I do? What's my best decision? And so, it's very important that we are training people to be able to be in that situation and provide sound, solid advice to people. So moving on, starting your career. Probably this is top of mind for a lot of you right now. I just wrote down a few things that I thought, just to get your sort of mind thinking about the kinds of things that you can be doing. And so obviously there's certain things that you can do, with the CHP program specifically. If you stop here and never take another class or a program again, I think these are all, great opportunities that you should be able to take advantage of. So herbal education, you can do talks, workshops, classes in areas of interest for you, either in person or now in the world that we're generally living in, online. The upside of being online is that you can be talking to people around the world. You're not just restricted to your own geographical locations anymore. But there's a lot of interest in doing talks and workshops, and the more popular that you get, or the more specialized your skill level or your interest in certain things, more and more people will be interested in having you. And I know some herbalists that travel around the world just doing talks. Robert Rogers, who does the mushroom program, the mushroom course in our program, he travels around the world talking about medicinal mushrooms and getting to meet people and do mushroom walks in all different parts. There's people that do flower essences, and they travel around the world as well. So herbal education can take you lots of places and introduce you to a lot of people, and provide a lot of enjoyment, I think. Herbal medicine making, this is another thing that I think is a really great opportunity for people. So, maybe starting your own local herbal dispensary, working at farmers markets, selling online. I mean, it's crazy to me, even since I graduated in 2001, the world that we now live in. When I applied to school back in the late 90s, I had to handwrite everything, and I mailed it in an envelope. And, now here we are, email is the norm, online delivery, people are buying things online. You're no longer restricted to your own geographical area. So, medicine making can be, a huge opportunity regardless of where you live now. If you're in a small town, it doesn't really matter. The world becomes your marketplace. So herbal medicine making is great. Herb walks, so leading walks in your own local area, kind of ties into herbal education, but it's a specific niche, I think, that a lot of people are interested in. And I think, to be honest, it doesn't really matter where you live. I was thinking about this yesterday. The college itself is located downtown Victoria. It's not a big city, but it is still a city. And we have ghost walks that go on. And I thought, why not approach like a company like that that's already doing walks and talks in your local city, and do something that's talking about the wild weeds of the city. Like everyone's stepping over the dandelion and the burdock and the chickweed and the plantain, and this whole grouping of medicinal plants that everyone is walking around on a daily basis that is probably more nutritious than the salads that you're buying at the grocery store, and providing you access to medicines that are right there. So I think there's some great opportunities to network and collaborate with businesses that are already in your area. Herb writing, so creating articles, content for blogs, websites, print media. There's no shortage of people that are looking for information on plant-based medicine, and you can be that individual to help create that content. Herb gardening, another good one. So designing, building, maintaining herb gardens for yourself or others. And again, one of the things that I thought about years ago that just never had time to actually get into, because we ended up starting this college instead, which took a lot of time. But approaching like landscape companies. I know there's a few here now that specialize in like edible landscapes, where they're sort of helping you make your vegetable gardens. But you could do medicinal landscaping, and as a community herbalist, I think it would be within your realm to work with this company. You could sort of say that you would like to go to specific individuals, to their house, maybe talk with the people who live there and say, what are your general health concerns? They might say, I have a lot of stress or difficulty sleeping, whatever it happens to be. And if it seems like it's something that's fairly easy to work with, you may recommend certain plants that they grow. You should grow some passion flower and skullcap and California poppy and chamomile. And you can work with that company to help sort of design a medicinal herb garden that's specifically relevant to their unique health needs. And then you can come back later, and again, you're being paid for this, to come back, help them learn how to gather that medicine, and then tie back into medicine making. And, here's how you make a salve, and we can make a tincture for this. And you're sort of helping enlighten people about the use of plants in their own backyard, and sort of creating this whole industry for yourself, which I think would be great. Herbal consultant, so working in a local dispensary, health food shop, providing advice, recommendations on herbal medicine. Again, there's no shortage of people that are feeling overwhelmed with their choices of natural health, either feeling unheard or invalidated sometimes from the healthcare community. We find that a lot in our herbal clinics at the college, that one of the main reasons why people come in is it's kind of their last hope. Sometimes their common phrase, they've talked to their family doctor, they've had tests done, they've gone to walk-in clinics, and they're not just getting any answer. The tests come back negative, but no one's recognizing that their felt experience is problematic and they're having these symptoms. And so, being able to provide sound, knowledgeable advice to people about what supplements are working, what herbs might be useful, I think that would be really great, but also acting as somewhat of like a health navigator. And so, you might access a lot of other healthcare services in your local community. Maybe you see a chiropractor, or an acupuncturist. And I think sometimes we just take for granted that everybody knows what these things are and what they do, and it's just not true. And so, someone coming in describing, stress or digestive disturbances for you, and you're recommending, chamomile tea or meadowsweet or whatever it happens to be, you can say, there's also a really great acupuncturist in town. And they might say, well, I thought acupuncture was just for pain. It was just putting needles in someone. You're like, no, it works for digestive health. You can work with stress and sleep. And so you can help sort of point them in the direction of other practitioners that would also be really worth their while. Herbal wildcrafting. So this is gathering local medicinal plants to be sold to restaurants and herb shops. So I think this is more up and coming. There's a lot of potential in this. I know some mushroom wildcrafters making, a very good living by finding local mushrooms and being able to sell those into the local culinary industry. And you can do the same thing for medicinal plants, and whether that's like edible plant flowers, so your nasturtiums and your marigolds and things like that, or other types of culinary herbs that they're going to be cooking with. And then other unique ideas. So, I mean, anything that can have kind of a herbal medicine theme to it, you can still sort of work on and sort of combine passions and interests. So like I mentioned before, traveling, a lot of traveling opportunity in the education side of things. But there's certain people, who travel for food. They go to a travel agency and they want to find out, I want to go to France and I want to find these great restaurants and experience these kinds of things, help me organize my trip. And so there's a number of people that are interested in plant medicines and, organic farms and permaculture farms and things like that. And a lot of them are welcoming the general public to come and see the process by which herbs are made into medicines. And so maybe you start to generate a list of places around the world where you can, live on a farm, or, do some woofing opportunities, or you're aware of herbal manufacturers that are open to tours. And you start to put together, packages or itineraries for people. So something like that. Herb games, kids games would be great as a way to try to engage people at a younger age level to be mindful of the natural world and their health and sustainability issues. And so there's a huge possibility for that, whether it's a physical game that you sell or something online. Organizing conferences. So there's no shortage of people, especially now online, that are looking for educational opportunities. So, pulling together groups of people, and it may not all be herbal medicine, but maybe you choose a topic like insomnia or menopause or dealing with stress, and you put together a speakers panel, a herbalist, a naturopath, a nutritionist, a counselor, and you sort of have these conferences that talk about very specific health concerns. Things like herb photography. People are always looking for content for their website or print material or things like that. And so, maybe that's something that sparks your interest as well. So a lot of opportunities, I think, is kind of what I hoped to leave you with in this sense. And then, moving on from there are other opportunities to sort of grow from here. And so I mentioned, the CHP program, our goal with that was to give you as much knowledge as possible to, grow your own medicines, harvest them, make medicines with them, learn some general ideas about how the body can go wrong, the disease processes, and trying to figure out ways to engage with somebody in the sense of using herbal medicine to help more for yourself and family and friends and things like that, or in like a local health food store. If you're thinking like, I want to have, like, I'm really enjoying this and I want to do more, and I would like to be able to help people more in their time of need with these very complex and problematic health conditions, then you're looking more for like a clinical practitioner type of program. And there are programs like that exist around the world. Obviously, PRC has one of them as well. But depending on where you live, look locally to try and find something. They're generally 3 to 4 years long, diploma to degree. and they should contain clinical hours of training. And so most of those herbal associations that I mentioned, the AHG, the National Institute, the Canadian Herbalist Association, they're looking for a minimum of 500 clinical hours of training to show that you've gathered as much information as you can to be knowledgeable and safe when it comes to working with the general public. And so that's a possibility for you to do, is to look into something like that. The clinical training hours generally should be broken up into like a graduated system where you're, watching herbalists do clinic first, so you get a sense of what this looks like and how, what kinds of questions people are asking and why that information is relevant. And then it should sort of be like culminating in you actually leading the consultation and working with patients on your own with a mentor, sort of overseeing you, someone that can provide feedback and guidance and to support you through that training process. So I think, that's a really great opportunity. If any of you are considering that, so far what you've been learning resonates with you, you feel passionate about it. I know for me, when I first started studying herbal medicine, it was the greatest thing ever. And, having this ability to look after yourself and utilize the things that grew around me to help other people and make a positive impact in their life, I can't really imagine something better, to be honest. So, if that's the kind of thing that calls to you as well, and you're feeling this strong passion, then clinical training programs, I think, would probably be something that would be really worth your while after the end of this program. There's other postgraduate training as well. So you can do a Bachelor of Science in herbal medicine. I think the UK is the only place. There might be one in New Zealand and Australia. But there are now Masters of Science programs in both kind of like herbal medicine and integrative medicine. So there's one that I did some training at in the UK, the University of Central Lancashire. Most of them are online because they recognize that there's not usually like a geographical conglomeration of herbalists that are all looking to do postgraduate work. So it really lends itself more to like the sort of global market. So it's great in the sense that you get to be doing a course with someone sitting in New Zealand and Australia and Canada and the UK and Africa and wherever, to sort of hear like different vantage points, the types of plants that they're using, their understanding of medicine, the variations in the energetic properties. And so, going through some of those are really great opportunities. And they're more if you're looking to do like research. So, one of the things that people sort of argue about herbal medicine sometimes is they're like, but, where's the research or where's the clinical evidence? You can say that this, plant has been used for thousands of years. And, I do this other presentation where I talk about chamomile and chamomile being found in the molars of preserved Neanderthals from 50,000 years ago. And the recognition that, chamomile doesn't have a nutritional value to it. So these individuals weren't consuming chamomile as a food, but the only reason it would have been in their teeth then would have been for some sort of medicinal property. And so, here's kind of like early evidence of a 50,000 year at least use of chamomile, the same chamomile we use today, as a medicinal product. So yes, I think we would all argue that there's not really a shortage of historical evidence of plants being used. And you could make the argument that, humans over time would have abandoned something if there was absolutely no benefit or use from it. So the fact that it's still being used obviously gives some indication that there is some value to it, but it's not the kind of value that the scientific model looks at. And so if you're thinking about maybe doing like clinical research, clinical trials, trying to sort of marry these two worlds together, the tradition and the folklore and the modern kind of approach, then a master's degree in herbal medicine or integrative medicine might be the kind of thing for you, where you're able to sort of put that research hat on and really move the industry forward and integrate better with modern healthcare practitioners. Or it could be that there's a complementary field that you're now interested in. So this is sort of like you're opening to the world of plants and medicine and healing and healthcare. And you're not quite sure that you want to be a clinical practitioner necessarily, but you definitely want to do more. There's a curiosity there. And so studies like ethnobotany, which is the study of how cultures around the world integrate with plants. And that's like, plants for building, plants for medicine, plants for cooking, plants for textiles and fabrics. So that might be something that interests you. Botany in general, maybe you find that you have a passion for plants. You love studying them and, maybe you get into like horticulture and growing plants. Or maybe it's the pharmacology. Maybe you're fascinated by the fact that these plants make these certain kinds of chemical constituents that are useful for the human body. Why is that? Why do these plants do this? And how do we isolate them? And how do we figure this out? And, this is a huge field that you can get into to try to, explore the wonderful opportunities that plants provide for medicine for a lot of people. So I think, ultimately it's best to just be flexible in what you decide to do, knowing that there's no one, real path to being a herbalist. And I try to say this to like all of my students as they're coming through the program, which is why we have, so many instructors. You look at the program that you're taking right now, it's not one person teaching you all the classes, and it's not, one individual doing all of these webinars with you. We recognize that herbal medicine is this living, breathing, diverse system of medicine that stems back millennia through human history. And there's no one way to do it. And so we want to try to provide you with as many opportunities to see how various people talk about plants, how they work with plants, how they use them. And so your path from here will change. Maybe you start thinking you want to do clinical practice, but no, you realize it's more research. Maybe you start thinking you want to make medicines, but no, it's actually, I want to farm and I want to grow. And so try not to be too rigid with your thought process and sort of have some flexibility and let the plants guide you. Paul Bergner, who's a herbalist in the US, talks about this sort of triangle of teaching, medicine making, and consulting as a really great way to try to build your business. So he says, you should do teaching, do workshops, do online classes, and the people that come to take those classes with you will meet you and get to interact with you, and then they learn that you actually make medicines, and they can buy some teas from you or capsules or tinctures. Or they also hear that you're doing, some sort of clinical practice, or that you, do some, educational component about herbal medicine, and maybe they come to see you for a consultation. Or maybe you're selling herbs at a farmer's market, and you meet somebody and you say, oh, actually, I teach a class on Thursdays if you want to join. And so now this customer of yours becomes your student. And so if you kind of look at each of those three areas, you get the sense that they all sort of relate to one another. And it provides, the thing that I like about herbal medicine, it provides this flexibility in your day. A lot of careers, it's the same thing day in, day out. Herbal medicine allows you to have this flexibility. Sometimes you're making medicine, sometimes you're teaching, sometimes you're working with an individual. And so each day is different. And even when you're working with individuals, they're different. Their health needs are different. Even if two people come in with high blood pressure, the reasons they have high blood pressure are different. The herbs that you might recommend might be different. So there's a lot of variation that I think, helps to keep things fresh and new and exciting. I would say choose things that you enjoy and are passionate about. I think that's always one of the biggest things that stifles people is, if they don't enjoy it or they're not really happy about what they're doing, then you're less likely to want to do it. And so I would try to find those things that really bring you joy. Look for a local niche. So if there's, something in your local area that you think isn't being done, or, you saw something somewhere else that was working really well and it's not happening where you are, then maybe introduce it there so that it's something that the general public might be really interested in. And kind of like I was saying with other businesses, like the ghost walks or landscape companies, but like reach out to local businesses and try to collaborate with them. Say, I'm a herbalist and I have this sort of background in herbal medicine, and I really feel like there's a unique opportunity here for me to, do a walk on this, or to help your current clients integrate this into their design. So rather than starting from scratch and saying, how am I going to build up this business? It sounds like a lot of work. Look to see what's available already in your local area and work with them. Because the one thing I can say right now is that businesses are looking for ways to be competitive, to provide value to what they're doing, to network and to work with others. So I think now is a great opportunity to reach out to some of these other businesses that exist, and then just be ready to build it in a steady and sustainable way. And consider your lifestyle choices. If you like traveling, then maybe choose something that's naturally aligned with moving around. It's kind of hard sometimes to have a clinical practice where you're looking after patients in a very specific area if every 2 weeks you like to be gone. because there's people that are going to be looking for that continuity of care. They need to see you in 2 weeks' time, and you can't just say, well, I'm in the rainforest now for the next 3 months. I'll see you when I get back. So, try to think about what lifestyle choices you want and how you want your life to kind of be unfolding, and try to choose aspects of the herbal medicine career that sort of is in line with that as much as possible. The only thing I would just sort of like try to emphasize again is that if you're looking to do that clinical work, that going through and doing more clinical training would be necessary. And then sort of the last part is talking about the future of herbal medicine. So we'll kind of finish up here and then open up the chat box there and see what kinds of questions you might have or anything else that you want me to be talking about. So the future, I think, is integration and collaboration. And there's an example. So I worked, I don't know if I mentioned this at the beginning, but I lived in South Korea for 2 years, and I taught herbal medicines there, and I learned about Chinese herbal medicine. And one of the things that I found fascinating was the way that their healthcare system works, and the fact that they integrate, sort of Chinese medicine and acupuncture and Chinese herbs, along with what we think of as Western medicine or pharmaceutical medicine, operations, surgeries, pharmaceuticals. The word drug itself comes from herbal medicine. It literally means dried plant. And so this sort of stems back to this idea that modern Western medicine has sort of been born out of these natural principles that we still abide by and function within. But the future, I think, is collaboration between those. And so, 20, 30 years ago, still in places like China, you would go to a hospital, and even as you were getting something like open heart surgery, the surgeons would be doing the open heart surgery. There would be acupuncturists who would be putting lots of needles in for pain management and tissue health, while you were hooked up to an IV drip of a herbal decoction. This is not crazy. This is not something that's out of the realm of possibility. It doesn't happen here. Those two worlds don't combine at this point, but there's no reason why they can't. In other parts of the world, they do, and I feel like they should here. One of the things that we keep hearing about the medical system in Canada, at the very least, but other parts of the world, is how overworked it is and how people don't have access to family doctors and the continuity of care, which I think is even more crucial today than it has been in the past, because a lot of our patients are experiencing chronic, long-term, complex health conditions. So they actually need more interactions with doctors. They need, someone who's sort of with them as a guide through this process, not someone that, anytime that they have a symptom flare up, they just bounce between practitioners and nobody has ever seen them before, and they don't know the past history. They're just put on another medication, and there's no real good follow-up. So I think, that's why our mindset has always been to teach at the highest level possible, because I still feel strongly that there is this requirement to really integrate as much as possible with the healthcare model that we have here, and that herbal medicine has a very important role to play. And so I think, that's a really important piece, because I think we need to be able to work with other practitioners, and kind of like what I was saying about being a health navigator. I think, one of the roles of being a herbalist is to try to help people understand what options they have for health and healing, and making sure that they are informed about all of their choices. All too often now it seems like people think of medicine and their natural inclination is, medical doctor, drugs, medications, and or surgery. And we need to go back to a point in time where we recognize that there's other forms of intervention, and that herbal medicine plays a really important role. There used to be an old adage that said, first the word, then the herb, then the knife. And that was sort of like one of the sort of mantras that people would use, counseling first, talking to people, educating them, giving them advice, giving recommendations. That would be the first step towards modifying their health. Then the herb, or changing their diet, integrating things. And the last opportunity is surgical intervention or some sort of extreme intervention. And all too often it feels like it's been reversed. I mean, the first option is usually completely removed, and you move straight into some form of like I said, pharmaceutical or surgical intervention. The other thing that we always need to keep in mind as herbalists is that we are the stewards of the plants as well and the land. And so, I mean, we already hear horrifying news about, climate change and the impacts of, humanity on the world when it comes to, animal life, insect life, plant life, biodiversity. And here we are advocating for the further use of plants. And so, if we want more and more people to sort of work with us and be more accessing of herbal medicine and plant-based medicine, we need to make sure that part of our job is this sustainable? What practices do we need to put in place to make sure that echinacea still exists and marigold still exists, and that we're not further damaging this world that we live in by advocating for more and more people using plant-based medicine. So, permaculture practices, biodynamic farming, ethical wild harvesting practices, eating and growing locally, so bioregionally versus shipping plants all around the world. These are all things that need to be the top of our mind as herbalists as well, because it's definitely part of our it's our modality. It's part of what we do and how we interact. And then lastly, just looking at kind of what I alluded to before, the change in the nature of disease and sickness for people. And they tend to be more complex. Western medicine is amazing for acute care and emergency care. If you have a heart attack, you get hit by a car, you have some sort of traumatic injury, you absolutely want to access the hospital and doctors and surgeons and medications. No one's saying that herbal medicine replaces any of those, but maintaining health, preventing disease processes from starting, managing side effects of medications, and even integrating to try to manage these complex chronic health conditions in the first place. Peter always talks about complex health conditions needing complex medicine. The thing about pharmaceuticals is that they're individual constituents. So one drug, one medicine is usually one individual chemical, and that's it. And our bodies, up until the last 50 years, have never really been engaged with single individual chemical constituents. It's not a normal way for our body to kind of be engaging with the outside world. It's used to complexity. You would eat foods and there would be thousands and thousands of chemicals entering into your bloodstream via your digestive tract and integrating with your immune system and your hormonal system and your nervous system. And so it just it responds better. It's just a more common approach. And so the complexity of the medicine that we offer in herbal medicine ties in nicely with the complexity of the healthcare issues that we're seeing more and more commonly now with people accessing modern medicine. And so I think ultimately there's a lot of opportunity for herbalists. We offer a lot. We have the ability to help a great number of people overcome their health concerns and live better, healthier lives. And the knowledge that you're getting in this program, I think, is going to provide you with such a strong foundation to be that positive change in your local community. If nothing other than telling people again that there are other options and opportunities for managing their health concerns. And so I wish you all the very best with your continuing studies with us and your future careers within herbal medicine. And like I said, if there's anything that I can ever do to help support you in any way, then I'm definitely here for that. So thanks for your time. It looks like we're right on an hour right here. So I'm going to open up the chat function and see if I can scroll down and see if I can see some questions that you guys have. So Sabina has a question. What about the ability of the client to give consent? In other words, do they or should they sign a statement that they understand and agree to the treatment? Yes, good point. And so most times, so informed consent is absolutely crucial. And so often I think that this doesn't happen. And so one of the things about informed consent is that you have to provide all the options to somebody so that they can actually make an informed decision. And so, even when you go see your family doctor or, any kind of healthcare provider, they are obligated to tell you. So yes, you could do surgery. Yes, you can take this pharmaceutical, but you know what? Modifying your diet would actually be as good as doing this. Otherwise, it's not really an informed consent. And so as a practitioner, as a clinical practitioner, and if you join a herbal association, or if we ever become a regulated profession, it's mandated that you would have a consent form. And even at the college, if you come and see us for a clinical assessment, you sign a document that basically says that you are, of your own free mind coming into the college, that you're looking for advice and recommendations about the use of herbal medicines. There's an inherent risk. Some people have allergic reactions that we may not be able to anticipate. It's not common, but we have to sort of mention, what the potentials are, and then people have to sign. And so, yeah, I think if you are, working with an individual, that you should absolutely have some sort of documentation that they sort of sign off on, agreeing that they're consenting to your treatment. And the other thing I would say, I tell students as well, that it's an ongoing thing. So if you see someone in January for insomnia, let's just say, and they give consent and they say, yes, I want to work with you with herbal medicine, and you do the best. And it's sort of like this 80-20 rule. 80% of the people will respond really well to herbs, and just some won't. Just like some of you have probably gone to see a chiropractor or a massage therapist, and you're like, yeah, for me, it just didn't do what I was hoping it to do. And so, you might try for a couple of months doing herbal teas and tinctures, and you're substituting plants. You're like California poppy and Jamaican dogwood, and they're just not getting any better with sleep. You still need to check in with them, a month in, 2 months in, and just say, okay, I've tried a lot. I'm not necessarily giving up on you, but how do you feel? Do you feel like you still want to continue? Do you want to try another formula again, or would you like some recommendations of other practitioners that might be useful for you to seek? So informed consent is an ongoing thing. Don't just put a signature, in 1 year and sort of keep going from there. Lindsay says, if we have previous training in acupuncture massage therapy, would that be considered further education for the biomed component of clinical herbalism? Yeah, I would say if you have additional training already, if you're aware of anatomy and physiology and pathophysiology and biochemistry and pharmacology, those are the kinds of courses that you would be taking in a clinical herbal medicine program as well. And so most schools will offer transfer credits. And so if you're applying to go to a different school, you would show them the background that you had in acupuncture, massage, or whatever it happened to be. And they would make an assessment of the level of education that you had received, and then tell you what courses you would be exempt from having to take again. And that would count towards your training. So that's a possibility as well. Let me keep scrolling up. Are there more? I don't see any other questions.
James, we have a question that came in from offline.
Okay.
And the question is, if you already have a healthcare practitioner, if you already are a healthcare practitioner in a regulated profession like acupuncture, are you allowed to incorporate herbal knowledge into your acupuncture practice?
I would say there would be no ruling on our part, sort of within the profession of herbal medicine, that wouldn't be acceptable. But I know it varies depending on the actual regulatory college that you're a member of. So different regulatory colleges. So I may be wrong about this, but I have this general feeling like chiropractors aren't allowed to sell products. They just feel, I think the association just kind of feels like it's a conflict, that they don't want the practitioner to sort of be profiting off of some advice that they're giving to somebody else. And so they're not able to. And so certain professional practitioners are sort of barred or not allowed to engage in certain kinds of practices. And so the best person to check if you are in a regulated profession already would be to check with your regulatory college. There's usually like bylaws or some sort of like constitution or information that talks about what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And before you get into it and someone ends up filing a complaint against you and taking you off guard, I would check with them first and just say, if I've got this additional training in Western herbal medicine, am I allowed to integrate that in my practice? I would say most likely it's going to be fine, but you just want to make sure that there's nothing to impede you from doing that. Just quickly on that note, the other thing I just wanted to mention, because I know this might come up with some of you as well, with respect to working with animals. And so there is an opportunity that's going on right now with the CHA of BC that we're trying to engage the provincial government to change the rules around veterinary medicine. But as it stands in British Columbia, the only people who are allowed to work medicinally with animals are vets. And so it doesn't matter, even if you are a registered acupuncturist, a registered massage therapist, a chiropractor, even in a regular profession, you can't work on animals right now. And so if any of you that are studying this program that are interested in working with animals potentially at some point in time, just know again that that's currently not allowed. That we're hoping to sort of make some modifications of that, but that's a protected practice exclusively reserved for veterinarians. How vastly different are the programs of study in the US versus Canada? Yeah, there's a lot of wildly different programs. And so this sort of requires you, well, one, to be very clear about what it is that your end goals are. Are you just looking for general knowledge, general information, or are you wanting to be a clinical practitioner? Because there are certain programs in the US that are degree level that do no clinic. They're kind of just theory based. So they talk about therapeutics, you do materia medicas, but there's no clinical training. And then so you would be required at that point to go and seek out other herbal practitioners to do clinical training with on your own. Other schools, they're kind of individually led. So it's one practitioner who's kind of started their own school and they teach everything. And that might be great. It's more of like an apprenticeship style where you really resonate with this person's understanding of plants and how they work and how they make medicines, and everything about what they do you love, and that would be great because now you're going to study with them and learn everything the way that they do. But if you're like me and you kind of want this like eclectic background, and how does Amanda do this and how does Peter do that and how does Robert get mushrooms? Then you're going to look for a school that has multiple faculty members, different backgrounds, different sort of learning opportunities. So I think that's pretty critical to think about. And then, what do you need the end qualification to be? And so, I mentioned that I went to South Korea and I ended up teaching English before I started teaching herbal medicine. But even to go to Korea to teach English, you have to have a degree. The degree can be in anything. And so, if you're looking to do like a master's program at some point, maybe when I was talking about ethnobotany, you're like, yeah, that's the thing that I want to do. You need an undergrad degree first. So if you're looking for a herbal medicine program, it would be important for you to find a Bachelor of Science degree program in herbal medicine, not just a diploma. Otherwise, you're going to end up having to take another course just to meet that requirement to have a degree. So you might as well do them all wrapped up together. So yeah, just be cautious that there's clinical training available and that they have the courses that you're looking for and the diverse background of faculty that you're looking for as well. So yeah, they're definitely different. The other thing I would say is, when I studied in England, in the UK, this was back in the late 90s, they were very motivated to try to integrate with the healthcare system. And so they cut a lot of the beautiful parts, I guess, of herbal medicine out of their program. So it was more scientific. So there was no like real tradition, no folklore, no energetics. We didn't talk about any of that because that was kind of frowned upon in the, the scientific community. And it's still to this day. I mean, there used to be, I think maybe 10 Bachelor of Science programs in the UK over the last decade, and they're down to one because there was this huge public campaign to pressure universities to pull these programs and their funding. So they campaigned against the businesses that funded the universities and ultimately said, this is the antithesis of science. How can someone who studies herbal medicine be given a Bachelor of Science degree? It's anything but science. And they would make arguments like, what's this whole thing about hot and cold medicine? That's ridiculous. And you're like, well, have you ever had a chili pepper in your mouth? Let's talk about hot and cold. And so, there was a lot of pressure in the UK to sort of conform to the medical model. And so their programs at universities obviously changed to kind of facilitate that. So I think what you get with the smaller schools is they're more agile, more nimble. They can be more accommodating to their students. And then when you move into like more larger and larger institutions, like, a large university where they have tens of thousands of students, they're not really focused on the 30 people who may want to be studying herbal medicine and sort of really catering it to your own unique needs. So yeah, I would say, smaller schools are great, larger, diverse sort of faculties, making sure there's a clinical training program, and then what is the end goal that you're trying to achieve with it and making sure that it aligns with that. Oh, I think there's another question. Are there any books that you can recommend that cover patient interview methods? I don't have one here with me. It comes up more, I think, with like clinical training practices. I'm trying to think of her name. I may have to email you at the end of it, but there's a book that talks about like clinical exam skills and the consultation. Oh, actually, there's Peter's book. I'm going to plug Peter for you. He has a book called the Consultation in Phytotherapy, and it's an amazing textbook that really goes through all of the ins and outs of patient communication and the dynamics of clinical care and the various roles that a practitioner has to take, which I think is really important to understand. That even, I was talking about there's a lot of flexibility being a herbalist. You can make medicine, you can teach, and you can be a clinical practitioner. Even a clinical practitioner requires you to be dynamic. So, different patients require a different approach from you. Some people, you need to engage with them and you need to be kind of like the teacher and they're the student. Others, you need to be almost like a pastor or like a minister, or it's like some sort of like spiritual kind of guide. Others, you have to be more of like a parental figure. Others are looking for more of like the mystical kind of energetic. And so it's not one size fits all. And I found this, in the opposite effect. One of my patients who came to see me once was a medical doctor. And I had just made this pre-assumption that he wanted to talk to me in like this scientific model and, Western medical terminology. And so we did the whole consultation, and I was trying to sort of live up to this expectation of being very methodical and clinically minded. And we got to the end and I told him, my thoughts and my ideas about the treatment strategy, and he agreed and he thought everything was great. But then he's like, I was kind of looking for like the folklore and the history and the tradition, the thing that we don't have in our system of medicine. I was like, right. Just because he is a doctor doesn't mean that's what he's looking for in his consultation. He was looking for the magic of herbal medicine. That's why he came to a herbalist. That's the thing that's missing that really resonated with him. So just be aware that in that clinical setting, there's a lot of flexibility, and Peter really does a great job, talking about that. How do you change your personality, your talking style, the language that you're using, all of those things to make yourself a better clinical practitioner. So pretty sure it's called The Consultation in Phytotherapy by Peter Conway.
Just a note on that, Peter's course at the end of the Community Herbalism program called Therapeutic Relationships also covers a lot of that, working with people, different language, different ways to just hold space. So keep an eye out for that.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from anybody? Any last questions or concerns? Or I'm hoping you found this inspirational or motivational, or at the very least informational.
Okay, well, James, that was fantastic. I think that sums everything up.
Okay.
We got all the questions answered. Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk through herbal regulation and career ideas. And I think it was really inspirational for everyone. So I think we have everyone saying thank you over here on the chat. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. And if you need to get a hold of me, maybe just check in with Liza. She knows how to get in touch with me directly, and we can go from there. Well, should I answer this one last question? From Alicia Holman. How does herbal ceremony fit into the discussion? I mean, that's a course I think that more Serafina was talking about. And I feel strongly that you can integrate ceremony. And I think, to be perfectly honest, I feel like ceremony is missing a lot from our lives these days. And I talk about this sometimes with patients. There's no rites of passage. There's no celebration, like coming of age or moving through transitions in your life that occur more in like indigenous practices and more traditional ways of thinking and behaving. And I agree. So part of like clinical practice for me and being a practitioner is potentially working in ceremony. And so you kind of have to gauge the level of involvement and engagement with your patient potentially as well. Kind of like what I was saying, some people will be like, no, I'm not doing this. Other people would love to hear, the ceremony about making a tea. Like it could be as simple as putting herbs in a pot, pouring hot water on it and letting it steep for 10 minutes. It could be, putting the pot of tea on a specific stone or crystal, or, having something written down, like the motivation or the goal that you're trying to achieve with that tea. You put that on it. You meditate on something. You think about it. Like, you have kind of like some ceremony around even the preparation of the medicine. And so, yeah, I think ceremony can play a huge part in that. I would say that probably Serafina in your program would be an ideal person to have some of those conversations with. And as far as I remember, like, part of her training in this course talks about herbal ceremony as well. But Peter's book also has some conversations, and he'll probably talk about it, like Liza said, in the last class that you guys are having in this program as well, with patient communication. So yeah, I would say herbal ceremony is important, and ceremony in general, I think, in people's lives are missing. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. It was great. I mean, it would be nice to see all of you and where you're from and hear more about you, but it was nice to be able to engage at least at this level. And so I thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. And like I said, if you need to get in touch with me, you can. And just good luck with your further studies.